right. Hi, everyone. How are you all? Good. Hooray. Happy Thursday. Hooray. It's Thursday. I'm grateful to you all for being here. Thanks for coming to the Poetry Center on a Thursday night. It's cold everywhere else, but it's suddenly not cold in Tucson, and that's a relief. So I'm glad you all are here. Excited that Edgar is here. Edgar wins the prize for most persistent travel to Tucson. And I want you to know before he comes up here that he dealt with 3 canceled flights and a 3-hour delay, and he's still here because of you. So, hooray. We can applaud poets with a blue-collar travel ethic. So, my name's Tyler. I work here as the director at the Poetry Center. We're really pleased you're here. Thank you for coming. I just want to say a couple of things before we get started, and then I'll turn things over to our introducer, and then we'll jump right into poetry. The big thing I want to mention, if you don't have one of these delightful and exciting calendars, these will tell you everything that's happening at the Poetry Center for the spring season. You can find it all online as well, and if anything changes, we can always update the website, but this is a great reminder. We work really hard to make these, and if you don't have one, we want you to have one. And there's some set up right here on my right, so if you're interested, please come grab one. They make great paper airplanes that are oversized, and large origami structures can be made with them, as well as learning all about the poetry readings that are coming, including the poetry reading that is next week, which is with the poet Brenda Hillman, who will be back here on Thursday night at the Poetry Center for our Tom Sanders Memorial Reading. That'll be at 7 o'clock in this space at the Poetry Center. And then on Saturday, we have a reading from the poet Robert Hass. And in a departure from what we normally do timeline-wise, that reading will be a matinee reading at 3 o'clock. He is going to mostly read from new translations that he has made from the Nobel Prize-winning Polish poet Czesław Miłosz. So he's excited to share those with us. That's Saturday at 3. Brenda Hillman is Thursday at 7. And so those are the 2 things that are coming up next. Edgar taught a fantastic course last night. Did anybody take that course? Were you here for that? Some of you were. Good work. Well done. There are lots of more classes happening at the Poetry Center this spring. If you're interested in those classes, this is also the tool you can use to learn about those. They're affordable, they're great, and they feature a lot of wonderful visiting and local poets teaching wonderfully at high levels to all kinds of Tucsonans. So we hope you'll avail yourself of those and sign up for classes. If you're interested, also this Saturday at 1 o'clock back here at the Poetry Center, we have one of our poetry circles. So these are informal conversations about poets and their work. This Saturday happens to be about Robert Hass, and so if you're interested at all in his work or learning more about it before his visit, it's a chance to learn about it. No preparation necessary. A packet of poems will be prepared for you, and then the conversation will be led by one of our docents, who is sitting right here, and it's Mark. Hooray! Free, open to the public, 1 o'clock on Saturday, and I hope you'll come and join us. It is a pleasure to introduce a great friend of the Poetry Center who's going to come up and introduce Edgar, and this is the poet Gabriel Dozal. Gabriel is the author of the wonderful book, The Border Simulator, out this year from Penguin Random House. Terrific book. He is a lecturer in the writing program here at the University of Arizona. We are very lucky to be in his orbit. Please help me welcome Gabriel Dozal.
But I'm lucky because I get to be in the orbit of the Poetry Center. The Poetry Center has built me. So for the past 3 days, there's been a mystery at the Poetry Center. There's not always mysteries to solve at the Poetry Center. Aria, Paola, Tyler, Sarah, and Julie are not Sherlock Holmes or Cagney and Lacey, or maybe they are. Edgar Kunz's fantastic, sharp, witty book of poems, Fixer, is in the Poetry Library across from us. But the Poetry Center has probably the most unique copy of Fixer that exists. For there are 2 pages that seem cut out and pasted on in what I can only describe as if you were reading like a pop-out book. And there's a fence that sort of comes off the page in a 3D effect. But in the internal debates at the Poetry Center, it was noted that there was a homemade quality to these pages, as if someone had torn out the pages and then tried to fix them. When Edgar arrived yesterday, you should check it out. Go see the book. It's strange. It's weird. It's a very strange copy of this book. So when Edgar arrived yesterday, the mystery was solved. The Poetry Center's copy is an anomaly, a printing error. Printing error or not, you should buy a copy of Fixer or tap out his first collection, because there is a working class magic in Edgar's poems. And then you can compare this magic to the wild copy the Poetry Center has, or even better yet, perhaps among that kind of like small hill of books, there's one other copy of Fixer floating around in this bunch of books that also has a printing error. And it would be like finding a golden ticket or winning $500 in a scratch-off lotto ticket. Reading Edgar Kunz's poems is a lot like winning $500 in a scratch-off lotto ticket. These are poems about what it's like to live now in 2024, working odd jobs to get by, streaming a radio station on your phone, and questions about the oncoming godlike technology that was already godlike. A poem in his new book titled, "Will Robots Take My Job.com?" Edgar is writing about topics that concern us now, in 2024. In an interview with The Rumpus, Edgar was asked if he knows his subject or what the poem is about before he writes it. And he says, "I've never been able to make any poem worthwhile by plotting it out and being methodical. I have to let the poem steer. It starts with an image or an idea or a little piece of language." This is such great advice, and the fantastic results are evident in Edgar's poems because every one is a winner and a stunner, expertly crafted rhythm and lyric, filled with surprise, family heartbreak, capitalistic heartbreak. These poems, as he says in that same Rumpus interview, are how he is living. And what a thrill it is to live along with him in these poems and sing at the top of my lungs, "Jump in the line, rock your body in time." Okay, I believe you, Edgar. These poems rock, and I'm so happy the Tucson community gets to experience them. Edgar Kunz is the author of 2 poetry collections, most recently Fixer, Ecco 2023, which was a New York Times new and noteworthy pick that was described by the Washington Post as a gritty, insightful debut. He has been a National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, a MacDowell Fellow, and a Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. His work appears in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Poetry, and American Poetry Review. Diane Seuss, author of the 2023 Pulitzer Prize-winning book Franke, Sonnets, called Edgar's latest collection, Fixer, a masterpiece. Please help me in welcoming Edgar Kunz.
You know, it's going to be a good reading when you get heckled in the intro, you know? Damn. Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Aria. And the rest of the folks at the Poetry. I mean, it's magic, right? It's really, really special. It's my first time here. It took me a while to get here, but I'm happy to be here at long last. What a gift, you know? I've never seen my face so big on a projector. Yeah. I'm gonna read some poems. I'm gonna start with some poems from this book. This is my first book. It's called Tap Out. I'll start with the first poem in the book. It's called After the Hurricane. It's important to have people in your life who call you on your bullshit. And I had a teacher at the time in my MFA program, you know, his name is Mark Jarman. And I wrote this really long poem that I was so proud of. You know, I thought this is the best poem I've ever written. And he said, well, the middle part is good. And so all I did is I cut off the beginning and the end, and then now it's the first poem in this book. So the title doesn't make any sense anymore, but I didn't have the heart to change it, you know? And so it's called After the Hurricane. 300 miles north, my father beds down in a van by the Connecticut River. Snow tires rim deep in the silt. He has a wool horse blanket tacked inside the windshield, a pair of extra pants bunched into a pillow. He has a paper bag of partially smoked butts, a paw sox cap, a Zippo. He has state-sponsored cell phone minutes and a camo jacket hung on the side view to dry. He can see the Costco parking lot through the trees, swelling and emptying out. He wants to fix things with his wife. He wants a couch to crash on. He wants a drink. He wants sex. He has a few cans of kidney beans and a tin of ShopRite tuna. Wrinkled plastic piss bottles line the dash. Sometimes he walks out to the river and lets the wind sift his lank and matted hair. Sometimes he peels his socks and stands in the murky current and thinks about his wife. Her one toe longer than the others, her freckled hands. He tries to hold her hands in his mind. He tries to remember the birth years of his sons. He tries to make sense of the papers he signed, the icy water wetting the hem of his pants, the river stones sharp underfoot, the wind. I hold him like this in my mind all afternoon. It's good to establish if we're gonna clap or not clap after poems early. And so we're not clapping, that's cool. But then don't clap for any poems, okay? Because I'm gonna feel like, okay, that poem was good and all the rest of them weren't. So just like, we're chilling. Are there any it was WWF when I was a kid, but WWE or professional wrestling fans in the house? Is anyone? Yeah, really, Gabe, my guy. Yeah. When I grew up, that was what we cared about. We watched SmackDown, we watched Raw, and so on. There were like pay-per-view stuff that you couldn't access unless you could convince your parents to pay money so you could watch it. Anyway, we all had our favorite wrestlers, and we didn't really understand that it was fake. And so we would practice the moves on each other. This poem, it's the title poem of the first book. And I wrote it really just trying to get some of the language of professional wrestling into a poem. The names of the moves are amazing, you'll see. And then it ends up spiraling, in the way that good poems do. They get away from you and they end up being about a lot more than you intended in the first place. I think you'll see what I mean. It's called Tap Out. We were vicious. Swollen cheekbones, bruised jaws, forearms chafed raw and weeping, the Boston crab, the Texas cloverleaf, the cross-faced chicken wing. One time, that's a real move, Bob Backlund, shout out. One time, Aunt wrenched my shoulder so hard I couldn't lift my arm for a week. Another time, Mike's brother Daryl tried a front flip slam off the back steps, landed face first in the dirt, wrist bone shot clear through the skin and gleaming. Mike's dad worked second shift at Pratt, so if we were loud, he'd holler out the bedroom window, but there was nothing he could do to punish us we weren't already doing to each other. And we knew it. Like that time Daryl showed us his pistol, a .22 he lifted from a friend's house. We passed it around, weighing it in our palms. It was heavier than it looked, but it felt good. He put the barrel in his mouth, and when we jumped up, he laughed and laughed. Priceless, he said, red-faced and gasping. You pussies almost wet your pants. We learned new moves, new ways to shock the body into miracles of pain. The figure forelock, the vice grip, every muscle trembling, the tarantula, the camel clutch, mouth pressed against their ear, hissing, tap out, dickhead. You're not getting out of this. You're mine, kid. Tap out and it'll stop. The sharpshooter, the hammerlock, that sour, hot breath in your ear and knowing you won't give in. You won't give him the satisfaction, even when it hurts more than anything, more than your dad's belt blistering your backside, more than the night when Daryl put that gun in his mouth and the sound of it woke the whole block. So much you grit your teeth against the pain, sharp kneecap bearing down on your chest, elbow torqued past its limit, and you swear you could bust out of yourself and look down at your body, helpless and small and trembling. Press your mouth to your own ear and whisper, not you, not you. It's a happy book, you know? Yeah. In a real way, I mean, you look at the two covers and it shows a trajectory, doesn't it? I mean, here's like a pretty dark book, and this is like gray. That's where I'm moving in my work, you know? This book is grim, but it is a pretty accurate representation of how I grew up. I was raised in some pretty intense neighborhoods in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And it's funny, when you talk to people from outside of New England, you say, like, I grew up in Massachusetts, and they think, like, you grew up in Massachusetts, like, you went to Choate or something, you know? Do you even know what that is? I was like, yeah, okay, right, yeah. And I'm like, not really. You know, I taught this class in that room up there yesterday, which was such a gift. The students were really talented and really present, and I was teaching about something I never really taught before. And afterward, one of the students stayed after and said, you know, this poem from your first book really meant something to me. And so I said, well, okay, I'll read it. I'll read it at the reading. I'm not even sure if she's here. Is Helen here? Maybe not. Anyway, Helen, if you see this on YouTube, this is for you. Also, shout out to Eric, my guy. I played I'd had a bike ride today, and I played some disc golf. Do you know what that is? Yeah, and I met Eric on the course, and I bullied him into coming. And he came, my guy. Thanks for being here. Yeah, Eric. Yeah. Graduating, right? A senior. Graduating. Yeah. Congrats, man. Aerospace engineering? Is that right? Yeah, wow. Okay, cool. Anyway, this poem's called Graduation. I'll tell you this, but I don't usually say this. It wasn't graduation in my real life. You know, sometimes I change details. This was my Eagle Scout ceremony. But it's too embarrassing to admit that. So I don't, you know, in the poem, I just pretend it's like my high school graduation. Anyway, graduation. When you showed up drunk as hell, humming tunelessly to yourself and slumped against the auditorium's faux wood paneling. When you fumbled in the pockets of your coat, fished out a cigarette, brought it to your lips, then realizing for the first time where you were, tossed it away and said, fuck it, loud enough that everyone turned in their seats, and a friend elbowed me and asked if I knew you. I shook my head and spent the next hour wondering why I was so glad you came. You who slept each night in your battered van, who skipped meetings and lied to your sponsor, who still called your ex-wife every day, restraining order be damned. You shouldn't have been there either. 100 yards was the agreement after you gathered all the meds in the house into a shoebox and threatened to take them. You had come regardless. You were there, and I was there. And when I walked the stage, you hollered my name with a kind of wild conviction, then said it a second time, less convinced. And I thought of that night when the cops came and you, unashamed of the fuss you caused, of your desperate public struggle for happiness, kissed me on the head once, twice, and went quietly. I can hear like little snaps from that. Yeah, that's cool. Like a little pitter patter is nice. Okay, I'll read just one more from this one, and then I'll move on to the new book. Do we all know what cryptocurrency is? That's a hard swerve. We didn't know we were going there. Yeah, Bitcoin. Cool. I went through a bad breakup. I moved to San Francisco and then went through a bad breakup immediately. You know, very convenient timing. And I ended up sleeping on my friend's porch for a while. And that friend was really into cryptocurrency and had just gotten a job with, this was the early days, you know, basically no one knew what it was. And it turns out he was like the first employee for Coinbase. Do you know what that is? It's like kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's one of the big companies. Anyway, he was kind of a dirtbag kid of, just kidding, I love you, Olaf, you're great. No, at the time he was like living with 7 other friends, and he was the younger brother of one of my best friends, and he happened to live in San Francisco, so he let me sleep on his porch. And then after maybe 5 years, he was on the cover of Forbes magazine. He was flipping a coin into the camera. He had like a Wayne Gretzky mullet. And he was wearing a tux, like kind of a magician, you know, and he was flipping a coin into the camera, which I always thought was so corny because Bitcoins aren't even real coins. They're just like numbers. Anyway, this poem is about that time of my life, and it contains everything I know to this day about cryptocurrency, which really isn't very much. It's called Interim. On the glassed-in back porch of a friend's house on Folsom, I slept 3 weeks on a heap of patterned wool blankets, a large Ziploc of granola, and a jar of pistachios on the sill. I woke to bus traffic in the floorboards and sun on my face, drank thin coffee, and scoured the listings for a studio someplace more possible. Each day, nothing. And each day, I paced the bright, narrow side streets with my friend who was taking time off and who was an expert in digital currencies. I'd tell him about the collapse of my marriage, and he'd tell me about the distant servers that mine electronic coins by solving complex equations. Not very helpful. The specialized equipment required for this kind of work. I would ask him basic questions, and he would answer patiently. The coins are encrypted code. The code is the currency. Value is determined by the market. Those days, every detail had the glimmer of potential cruelty. Hot pink curtain caught in a shut window. Drain pipe signed King Baby in whiteout pen. Paper bag of potatoes rotting in the trunk of the car I borrowed to retrieve a crate of books from storage. I called a man about a place above a Thai restaurant and lied about how much I make in a year. He was from Pittsburgh. We talked about rain. He said he'd call later to tell me if I got it. On another walk, I asked my friend more questions. Will it replace cash? Yes. Is it untraceable? Yes. Well, what happens when they run out of equations? A bus hummed past, skimming the branches of the ficus tree, giving us shade. It's not like that, he said. It could go on forever. I've really cornered the market on crypto poems. Nobody's doing it like me. Anyway, cool. So I published a new book. That was my first book, and it tells the story of my early life, you know, as a lot of first books do. And it's a little grim, and it's uncompromising. And it really doesn't have a sense of humor. And so I wanted to write a book where more of my personality was coming across, you know? And so I'm proud of what I've been able to do in this book. I think it's a little more how I am as a person. So to get us started, are we feeling good? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, good. So I'm gonna read the first poem in this book. And it's got no punctuation. It catches up. So my books I'm such a narrative writer, but I'm too much of a coward to write novels. So I write poems that are narrative, and like the books have an arc, you know? The character starts one place and ends up in another place. I don't really mean that. I think poetry is the best genre. I do. And so this poem picks up with the speaker kind of where the first book leaves him, you know? Are we all fans of Stevie Nicks? Yeah, okay. Do we all know who Stevie Nicks is? Yeah, okay, cool. I talk about her in this poem. Day Moon. After I left, I waited for someone, a friend or her herself, to walk quickly up to me on the bus or in the bustling coffee shop and slap my face, spit on my hands, call me a bastard, a real motherfucker. By waited, I mean I wanted to be revealed by some visible sign, a welt to ride the ledge of my cheek through the glass-littered streets. It didn't come, and I grew desperate. I stared too long at strangers at Safeway. I bought boxes of clementines and ate them like a possum on the train, cramming the rinds in the gap between the seat and the wall. I drank warm beer. I made no calls. I sat on a hot metal bench by a briny lake and tried to imagine the lives of the joggers passing in front of me, their joys, their sicknesses and regrets. I was useless. I thought of my friend who wrote a novel over a long winter in Nova Scotia, read it once, and buried it in the copse of birches behind the house. He chose the spot, he said, for its plainness, so he couldn't remember later and dig it up. And in this way, one medicated season slid into the next without incident. Gardenia bloom, persistent sun. I fell in love with the perfect voice of a Midwest radio DJ from a station I streamed on my phone. Called in one request after another. I fell in love with a video of Stevie Nicks singing backstage to her makeup artist. Sheer cotton dress, their harmonies breezy and immaculate. I woke around noon to the thup-thup of helicopters and another unsober voicemail from my dad angling for a loan. Went out in my underwear and found a fine black powder settling on the windowsills, dusting the parked cars, a day moon suspended in orange haze. It turned out a man who would go months without getting caught was methodically setting fire to the half-built condo complexes one by one. 1 in 10,000 residents is a billionaire, the same article told me. Though I could be forgiven for thinking the headlands were burning again, the intervals between disasters collapsing, I caught my neighbor's eye. She was stretching on her stoop in a fantastic powder blue tracksuit. What a world, I said, and she did not seem to hear, and jogged across the narrow street, the moon behind her rising or sinking, or neither. It was hard to know. Stevie. That video is incredible if you haven't seen it. It's called Wild Heart. It's the seed. I think there's an important lesson maybe to be learned in it. It's the seed of a song, you know? She's got like a line or two lines that she repeats over and over again. She's really young, you know? She's got something and she knows she has something. That early moment is so precious, so special. And then I shouldn't say this, but she turned it into an actual song later. It's not that good. It's not, you know, like the early seed of it was so good. Anyway, if you just Google Stevie Nicks backstage Wild Heart, you'll find it. I've watched it literally hundreds of times. Anyway, this book is also about weird jobs that I've had, and so I thought I'd read this one. Do we all know McCormick Spice Company? With the red lids and so on, they're in every supermarket in America. Their headquarters is outside of Baltimore, Maryland, which is where I live and where I went to college also. And so after school, I graduated into the Great Recession, lovely. And so I did a lot of weird side hustles, and one was working as a taste tester for McCormick Spice Company. I ate a lot of hummus, and I told them what I thought about the hummus. I'm so proud that this poem is in the book because it's literally just a description of my job. It's called Tester. I catch a bus out to the county and check in at a beige terminal, and they ask me about the smells and textures of various dips. And I click appealing or not appealing, then elaborate in the text box below. Artichoke and French onion. Spicy 3-bean queso. I got in on referral. I live with 7 other people. I measure rent and how many sessions I have to do with the dips. I start testing what I can get away with. Notes of bright espresso. Mouthfeel of a sun-ripe plum. I write longer and longer. I don't think they read a word. It's weeks before you're entered into the system, more weeks to get your tiny check. Aline says, if you think it's a scam, why do you keep saying yes? In the fluorescent room, I receive one dip after another from blue-gloved hands. Always the same plain tortilla chips to dip with. The same hands clearing away the tiny plastic cups. I tinker with my descriptions. If I need water, they bring me water in slightly larger cups. It's honestly the best job I've ever had in my life. I wrote my poems, and they fed me dips. Oh, gosh. When did we start this reading? 7? Where has the time gone? I thought I'd read some poems from the middle of the book. It's all one section. I wrote the poems individually, and I wrote them all in a week and a half, which has never happened to me before in my life. I'm a slow writer, really, and I'm not a high-volume writer, so I tend to be really precious about what I do write, and I work it and try to make it into something. But this time I was just struck by lightning. And it's because I was avoiding my subject. My dad had died, finally. He'd been dying for a long time. He was an addict and an alcoholic, and we all kind of knew it was coming, but he was 52. He died in his sleep, and so he died right before my first book came out. And so I'm hitting the road, reading these poems, and a lot of them are about him, and it was a really intense time. And so I avoided the subject of the sort of aftermath of his death for a long, long time. I basically didn't write for like 2 years, which is devastating, if you think of yourself as a writer. And I realized that it was maybe because I was avoiding the big, difficult subject in my life. And so I finally was like, okay, I'll try to write something about it. And then all these poems came flowing out, just one after the other. They just were waiting to be born. And so I'll read some of these. I might read, we'll see. I'll read some of them at least. They're all called Fixer. I mean, the whole poem is called Fixer. And each individual poem has a secret title, and I'll let you in on them as I read them. This first one is called Rodeo. We're breaking into your apartment through your bedroom window. The maintenance guy's ladder is propped against the sill. I climb the ladder rung by rung. It shivers. I try not to look down. A face appears in the glass. What are you doing? The face says. I'm looking for my dad's, I say. I thought this was his window. Aren't you Ken's boy? He says. No, I say. Chris's. Oh, Chris, he says. He's dead. I know, I say. I thought you could be Ken's, he says. Sorry, I say. Believe me, the face says, not my first rodeo. I climb down. We haul the ladder to the next window and try again. Museum. Better than the minivan you slept a winter in. American Legion parking lot, siphoning gas for heat, but not much better. Cinder block apartment building on Homestead, a couple miles from Mom's. Got in through the window, waded through the cans and bedding, left it open for the smell. Tried not to look at the stain. Tried to be respectful, like in a museum. Stood for so long in front of your dresser, my brother touched my elbow. Everything we touch, you touched. Your socks, your coat, the cash in your pockets, the cellophane from a fresh pack, Zippo with the carving of a whale, proud ship in the distance. The cover of this book is actually my dad's lighter. I mean, it's a photo of my dad's lighter. Yeah. I had a friend take it, and I kind of, what's that? It's broken. Yeah. Right now, it's on my mantle in my house. Yeah. How are we doing on time? Did I start at 7? Good Lord. Yeah, all right. Was it 7:15? Thank God. All right. I looked at the clock and thought, oh no. Okay, perfect. Thanks for telling me that. This one's called pomelos. Do you know that fruit? Pomelo? Yeah. I think it might actually be pronounced pomelo. When I was doing the audiobook for this book, the director was like, I don't think that's what it's called. But she was really cool about it. She was like, you pronounce it how you want. And so I will. Pomelos. And this is sort of after a Natasha Trethewey poem that I really love called Myth. It's a mirror poem, and it starts, the lines go in one direction, and then they go in reverse order till the end of the poem. And it starts with the line, I was asleep while you were dying, and it's about her mom. And so this poem starts sort of with a line like that. I think I was in California when you died. There's a window, the cop said, but we can't be sure. Maybe it happened while Kay and I were having sneaky sex, then linking up with friends we missed, friends from when we used to live there. Or while getting hammered touring our old spots, Baggies, Heart and Dagger, Eli's Mile High, and we tried to call it. But when we got back, the neighbors were still dancing in their Halloween best, so we started swigging from a plastic handle and sharing cigs and singing Baby's Black Balloon Makes Her Fly, maybe then. Or when a bearded man in sequins piggybacked our friend, and we reached on tiptoe to pull ripe pomelos from the dark. It's weird how important that feels. You know, where was I exactly when you died? And you don't get to know in a lot of cases, right? You don't get to know, but it nags at you. My brother said this poem to me on the phone. I was in such a fever dream writing these middle poems, and I don't usually do this, but I fact-checked some of them, you know? I sent them to him. I don't recommend this. Don't do this if you write poems. But I called up my brother, and I said, hey, can I run some of these past you? And he said, yeah, sure. And then he said this poem to me on the phone. I'm not joking. He just said the poem almost verbatim to me on the phone. It's called Ground Guy. Renee and I were doing some limb work, Noah says, on the tree out front, that twisty pine at the corner of the house, taking a couple widows off it. And Dad drives up drunker than I've ever seen him, or close, in a red Ford Focus, gives me the biggest hug he can, considering he dropped 20 pounds since I last saw him. And I'm the ground guy, holding the rope. Puts his arm around my shoulder and just kind of stands there. Neither of us saying a word, not knowing after 2-3 minutes he'll get back in the car and drive off. Last time I'll ever see him. Because when you're the ground guy, you gotta focus on the guy in the tree. You mess up and that limb swings out and hits the line, bang, the whole block goes dark. Sometimes a poem finds you through another person's voice. It's crazy. I'll read this one just because it's taken me a long time to feel brave enough to read it. It's a found poem in a way. I think you'll see what I'm talking about. It's called Inventory. The heart weighs 360 grams. Stenosis in the coronary, 80% occlusion. The valves are unremarkable. The ventricles are unremarkable. The brain weighs 1,310 grams and is normal size and shape. The brain stem has the usual patterns on cut surface, positive for duloxetine antidepressant in the blood, positive for nicotine, for ethanol. The genitals are those of a normal man. The scalp has no contusion. The skull has no fracture. The mustache is a 1/4 inch. The beard is a 1/2. The nose and facial bones are intact. The tongue is unremarkable. The airway is clear. My mom gets the last word in this section of the poems, which feels right. You know, she often does in real life too. It's called Piano. I held him together as long as I could, she says. He stopped working, stopped coming upstairs. He was like tissue paper coming apart in water, like smoke in my hands. It had nothing to do with you, baby. You left when you had to. I met a woman once who worked on pianos, said it was a hard job, the tools, the leverage, the required ear. I love it, she said, but it's brutal. The second I step away, it's already falling out of tune. All right. I'm going to read some love poems. I'm in love. I got engaged this summer after 8 years, you know? It's kind of time, you know? Yeah. Oh, well. I'll read just 2 more poems. How's that? Yeah, I'll read 2 more poems. Yeah, this poem's called Golden Gate, and I kind of turned it into an essay if you want to read it in prose form. It's just about like getting into an argument with my landlord in San Francisco, where the rents are, as you can imagine, absolutely absurd. Yeah, Golden Gate. I could hear every bit of laughter passed between the dishwashers at the cafe I shared a wall with. And one morning, touching that wall, felt it give wetly under my hand. I called my landlord, knowing the apartment above me was vacant, a space I gambled larger than the one I had, where every piece of furniture touched. He surprised me by saying yes. I could stay there during repairs. I made my calculations. You were giving up your perfectly good spot in Denver. I had a month to convince him to come down on the rent. I moved my bed up, but left the rest, which workers covered with a tarp. When the work was done, I went on squatting in those bright upstairs rooms. The windows are unreal, I told you, for weeks, pestering the landlord every few days, going to his house, walking with him in his garden, trying to explain. He relented at last, grumpily, and I moved the rest of my stuff before he could change his mind. You came with everything you owned, and suddenly we lived together. That first morning, you noticed a red access ladder I had missed outside the kitchen window, and we climbed, one going first, the other handing our coffees up and clamoring after. And that high, we could see the bell tower at Berkeley, eucalyptuses in the hills, and traffic careening down Alcatraz, hint of salt on the wind. And though we would leave this place too, and soon, when the rent, despite our pleading, ratcheted beyond us, if you craned your neck a little, perched delicately in the distance, no fucking way, you said, was the Golden Gate, stitching the city to the headlands looming across the bay, and we were moved to silence by it, gripped by a pure, clear idea beyond experience, and stood a long time, touching shoulders, touching knees. You guys have been so great. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for being here when you could be anywhere else. This is the last poem that I'll read from this collection. And it's the last poem I'll read, period. There are no more collections to read from. It's the reason the book exists, you know? I think it's one of the best poems I've ever written, and so I read it every time that I read. It's got no punctuation, kind of like that Day Moon poem with Stevie Nicks in it. So I'm going to read it accordingly. Do you know what a night heron is? That bird? Yeah. It's a heron kind of in name only. You know what I mean? It's like a small, kind of hunched bird. You know, if someone would have to tell you that it had the title heron for you to believe it. But we became obsessed with this bird. We lived in Oakland for some years, and by this lake that was kind of a bird sanctuary, and there were pelicans and cormorants and all kinds of gorgeous birds around, and the one bird we fell in love with, of course, was this little weird guy. So he makes an appearance in the poem, and I think for that reason, it's called Night Heron. What now? You'd flown in from a Midwest city named for its rowdy summertime abundance, lying, saying you were coming to visit friends in San Francisco. And I'd taken the train from chilly Oakland to meet you, and we rode north, carefully not touching. I took you to the tiny one-room apartment I had escaped to after the divorce and fried us nervously some potatoes in a cast iron pan, a little rosemary, which we did not eat because you kissed me hard. And we went in a rush to the mattress I bought off a guy in a semi-famous band and had only the day before gotten off the floor and onto the pine wood bed frame I'd found and hoisted on my back and carried down out of North Berkeley, arms wide, weaving through the side streets, towing the center line to avoid snagging the Buckeyes leaning out. It was about suffering in public. It was dramatic, sure, but the dramas of my life those days were pitched as high as I could stand, higher sometimes. I said, breathless, I want to taste you. And you said, please, yes. And later, out at the edge of the lake, huddled against the damp wind, hot grease soaking through a paper bag, licking salt from each other's fingers obscenely, a night heron peered up at us from the reeds, small, hunched, dipping its shining beak in the shallows, not particularly beautiful, but a heron nevertheless. The same one we were sure we saw perched on the awning outside the theater, whose marquee shouted slogans like, "We live in a fake democracy," and "prevent unwanted presidencies with hand-counted paper ballots." And later, the cabin we rented with friends in Calaveras, snowmelt vaulting the redwoods to magnificent heights, drinking rye, and each of us practicing our best wolf howl at the waning moon, which was ridiculous, yes, but once we started, it became impossible to stop. Waking up next morning hoarse and happy, and you moved west, and we lived together in a studio overlooking the cafe dumpster, and then back east on a dream of a house and a garden, and then my father died. And at almost the same age yours did, and both from drink and an unnameable sadness. I went back to Connecticut alone, 3.5 days, my mother said, before anyone had found him, in his apartment on the far side of town, and going with my brother, which we should not have done, and dragging the mattress out, and clearing the maggots off the ceiling with a shop vac, and so on. And later you came, and we walked through the basement of my mother's house. I wanted to show you where for a while he lived, and how. And you slung your arm around my waist, and we moved slowly together, bare fluorescent bulb shining on the Budweiser ashtray, the carpentry tools I would inherit, the ratty couch he crashed on for years. You held up an old Calypso record he loved and sang out softly, "Jump in the line, rock your body in time." And I sang back softly, "Okay, I believe you." And after a while, Mom at the top of the stairs shouting, "What are you kids doing down there?" And climbing the steps, you pinch my elbow and ask if I'm okay. And I hear myself say yes, which is not a lie, though I'm not listening. I'm letting myself feel how astonishing what our love can make of a place like that. Thank you so much.
What a gorgeous reading. One more round of applause for Edgar Kunz. Like Gabe mentioned, books are for sale over here, so I hope you'll buy some. I'm sure Edgar's excited to sign them, so come up and talk with Edgar, talk about the work, get to meet him a little bit, and we'll hope to see you next week back here at the Poetry Center for the Reading with Brenda Hillman. Thanks, everybody, for being here.